Why should the United States stay in NATO? And why should NATO even exist if its initial purpose was to combat and control Soviet influence and expansion? After World War II, the United States made an agreement with most of Western Europe and said, any attack on you guys is considered an attack upon me, and I will defend you accordingly. And since we at the time had the world's largest nuclear arsenal, that threat was taken seriously, and it still is. But again, if the United States won and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, why does NATO still exist? What is the point of having any kind of alliance anymore if there is no longer a Soviet or a major communist threat? Well, why don't you guys ask Mikhail Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, and Vladimir Putin? All three have spoken with the United States president at some point in history, requesting to join NATO, or at least showing a deep interest in becoming a part of the alliance. And whenever Vladimir Putin falls, the next Russian president will be asking the American president if, this time, Russia could finally join the alliance. But every American needs to keep in mind the fact that even though the Soviet Union no longer exists, which was controlled primarily by Russia, Russia still exists, and Russia is still doing Russian things, like invading their neighbors and trying to take over their government. When the United States formed NATO after World War II, Russia did the same thing, and they made the Warsaw Pact. Now, once communism fell in Europe, why on earth, as time progressed, did the former Warsaw Pact countries that were historically allied with Russia, why did they side with the United States eventually and start joining NATO, like the Baltic states, Poland, the most recent addition of Finland? The Baltic states and other former Warsaw Pact countries had a decade or more to decide which country they wanted to be more aligned with. And why did none of them, with the exception of Belarus, choose Russia? The reason is very simple. These countries knew that if they joined NATO, Russia would never invade and try to annex these countries again, the way Russia did to Transnistria in Moldova, the way they did to South Ossetia in Georgia, and the way they did to Crimea with Ukraine and the rest of Ukraine right now. These countries had a choice: NATO membership or eventual Russian annexation. And we all know which is the better choice. And while a lot of people who don't know any better like to claim that, well, Russia invaded Ukraine and all of these other countries because America violated its promise to not expand NATO 1 inch eastward after the agreement with Gorbachev and James Baker. Something these clueless people can't get across their heads is these were verbal assurances. There was no treaty, there was nothing ratified about NATO not expanding. And if we are only going for verbal assurances, then I'd like to point you to almost every statement that Putin made up until February of 2022, saying that there would be no invasion of Ukraine. And if Putin's invasion of Ukraine was to stop America from getting other countries to join NATO, well, that failed miserably because Finland and Sweden ended up joining after the invasion. And now Russia's entire western border is laced with NATO countries. This means that there are now 32 developed nations who are learning how to integrate their military capabilities together to work as one, which is something Russia cannot stand a chance against. You might be thinking, well, Geo Husar, this is great, but how does that benefit the United States in any way, shape, or form? Well, for one, the United States sets the standard for NATO weaponry, meaning that all NATO systems have to be interoperable with U.S. military tech. So that is a huge amount of required investment from these 32 countries into U.S. weaponry. The United States gets at least $100 billion a year of foreign direct investment from NATO allies and another $100 billion or more in weapons purchases. Outside the United States, the best weapons developers are still NATO members, meaning that the United States gets to work with R&D with other top-tier competitors to make even more cutting-edge military technology. And the United States gets to wield its economic, diplomatic, and military leverage on almost every other country on the planet because of this NATO alliance. So when the United States says, hey, we're going to sanction Russia, or hey, Venezuela, you can't sell or refine as much oil, people just listen. That's what happens. Last but not least, the US membership and leadership of NATO allows it to use its primary weapon, which it has used to destroy several countries, and that is the US dollar. Oh yeah, and what is the name of that commodity that is priced primarily in US dollars that is the lifeblood of the world? Oil. So guys, if you're ever curious as to why we're still in NATO or why it's useful, just watch this video or send it to someone who has the same question. Thanks for watching.